Hey, welcome back to the Urban Monk. Today we're going to talk about a serious subject. It is a subject that we hear about way too often nowadays, ADHD, and ADD being the kind of the brother sister of that disorder. But there's been so many kids diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder in the last decade or so that it's just been startling. And so with me today, my guest is Alan Schwarz. He is a journalist extraordinaire. He's done a lot of research on this, and really we wanted to get into kind of the underlying politics and really kind of the magnitude of this and see what's going on, B, what we can do about it and how we could start thinking about it differently. So Alan, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks very much. It's good to be here.
So what drove you to start looking into ADHD in the first place?
Well, I had been an investigative reporter at the Times. I left only in August of this year, and I actually had been a sports writer. And in the early 2007, I got a tip of how the NFL was mishandling its concussion protocols and whatnot, or frankly, they had no protocols. And I did a lot of very high-profile stories that have since been credited with putting concussions and head trauma on the national in the national conversation and getting the National Football League to change its policies, et cetera, leading to the lawsuit and all sorts of other things. But the thing is that in 2011, about mid-2011, I had done that for 4.5 years, and I wanted to do something else and something that didn't have to do with sports. And when I heard that kids in my old stomping grounds of Westchester County, New York, were snorting Adderall before the SATs, I was so horrified that I wanted to learn more. And as I looked into what I had always thought of as an academic pressure story, what are we doing to some kids to make them want to do this? It became very clear to me that the system through which the drugs are dispensed, meaning ADHD diagnoses in children, was so far out of whack and so mishandled that I looked into it very, very much more, and it resulted in about 8 to 10 front-page stories in the Times over a couple of years. And it was after that that publishers came to me and said, would you like to write a book on this important cultural issue? And here we are.
So how did we start getting into this mess? I mean, was it just a shift in a paradigm where doctors started to think they saw it more? Is it misdiagnosed? Like, what'd you start uncovering?
Well, I mean, it's been a very long process. A lot of people think that all the concern about ADHD and questions of whether it's overdiagnosed is a reasonably new phenomenon. It actually isn't. Ritalin was first used in children in about 1963, and it didn't take very long. In 1970, there was the first congressional hearing on the misuse of Ritalin or overuse of Ritalin in unruly, if you will, children. This has been a part of the national conversation for a very long time. Now, back then it was called minimal brain dysfunction, which is obviously a relatively unpalatable term. They rebranded the disorder in 1980, calling it attention deficit disorder. And they've since added the hyperactivity. They've sort of been fumbling around with the name for it for a while. But the diagnosis, and it's leading toward the medication. Once Ritalin, now Adderall, Concerta, Vyvanse, and a few others. The diagnosis and the drugs are very tempting for parents and doctors to try, because in general, the drugs help people, human beings, whether they have ADHD or not, focus, sort of calm down if they're all over the place, and concentrate and be less inattentive and less jumpy and hyperactive. And the thing is with kids who have a very hard time doing that, the results are can be even stronger. And it helps them do better in school often. And hey, who doesn't want their kid to do better in school? Yep. If it can be this little drug. Now, it doesn't always work that way. There are side effects, there are risks, and we can talk about those later. But it's very seductive for a diagnosis and then a prescription to help your kid in school and help your kid calm down and maybe make your life easier. Parents are human beings too. Mm-hmm. And as life gets more chaotic, if your kid's out of control, man, maybe he doesn't have a lifelong, brain disorder, but maybe if we give him these meds, it'll help everybody out, including him.
Yeah.
And so you just see the diagnosis creep. You saw 2 to 3% through the 70s and even the early 80s. And then you saw cross past 5, and then you saw 7, and then you saw 9.5 from the CDC in 2007. And then in 2013, it reached 11% of current children aged 4 to 17 had been diagnosed with ADHD. But no, it's worse, because a lot of the kids who are 4 to 17 haven't lived long enough to receive the diagnosis they ultimately will get. And so when you look at after kids have gone through their childhoods, you look at teenagers right now, 15% of high school aged children in America across the entire country, and 20% of boys, 1 in 5, get diagnosed with ADHD. And it's 30% of boys in some parts of the South. And of course, a lot of those kids really do need help. They have serious issues. And in order to have some sort of an education, interventions are appropriate, even sometimes medication. And so I certainly don't give a lot of time and thought to people who are just inherently against medication. No, you should never use psychotropic medications in children. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't listen to certain arguments, but I got to tell you, they're doomed. And so what we need to do here is say, look, there's a place in our culture and in medicine for this diagnosis and for these medications, but they are so wildly overused and misused now that we need to figure out a way to be far more judicious in how we diagnose and medicate, because right now, more than half the kids who are diagnosed, frankly, probably don't fit the diagnosis. They may have other problems. They may have anxiety. They may have parents fighting at home. I mean, there are a lot of things that make a kid distractible or inattentive or jumpy in school. Okay, it could be sleep disorder or problems. It could be their diet. It could be bullying at school. I mean, it makes a kid, not really pay attention if he's always looking over his shoulder. Discord at home, as I said. There's a lot of things that can manifest themselves in the behaviors that medicine has called ADHD. Sometimes there is no other explanation, and by God, they really do fit this construct.
So
but a lot of the time they don't.
Is it the construct that is a little too broad, or there just not enough time for the doctor who, I'm assuming is going to be a family doctor, GP, internist, someone, pediatrician, doing this? I mean, is there like a psychological evaluation? Do they need to go through kind of another rung of specialists to be able to ascertain whether or not this is bullying or ADD, ADHD? Like where are we breaking the chain here?
Well, I think you had 3 parts to that question, and I'm going to try to parse each of them and remind me if I stray. All right. First of all, you said is the definition too broad, or is it too broad? And the answer is yes. The psychiatric establishment, the American Psychiatric Association, and the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry have spent 30 years taking what had been a reasonable definition of what would be severe behavior, what would be really worth intervening with what is, pretty powerful medication. And they have spent 30 years broadening it and loosening the spigot, changing the wording to the point where the symptoms and the severity of the symptoms are so weak that just about any kid could be considered for a diagnosis. Now, not every kid, of course. I'm not trying to be glib. But basically, every kid seems ADHD from time to time. And if you overreact during that period, you can get them a diagnosis very easily. Now, as far as the doctors, there are a lot of different types of doctors who make this diagnosis. You have child psychiatrists, you have neuropsych folks, you have behavioral pediatricians, family doctors, nurse practitioners. In some states. They're all doing a not so wonderful job. There isn't one group more at fault than others. However, and maybe this is the third part, of your question, you said, do the pediatricians or doctors not have enough time? That is an argument that I have absolutely no patience for. Because if a pediatrician says, you know what, I only have 20 minutes, I only get reimbursed for 20 minutes, and so I'm just gonna wing it, and let's try this Concerta and see if it helps. Well, that's pretty stupid, because first of all, you can't make an accurate diagnosis in 20 minutes. You're supposed to take 4 or 5 sessions. You're supposed to talk to the teachers and talk to the parents and try to figure out where might these behaviors be coming from.
Is that happening?
Sometimes it is, a lot of times it isn't. And I think my point is that if a doctor tells you, well, I only had 20 minutes because insurance doesn't, reimburse me enough, you run out of that office.
Yeah, it's
because
malpractice.
that doctor doesn't know what the heck. I mean, look, to get the diagnosis and prescription correct on the part of the doctor can be heroic. To get it wrong can be child abuse. And we're doing a rotten job of making sure that we're accurate more often than we're not. There is no other diagnosis, no other condition in American medicine that tolerates an inaccuracy rate of about 50%.
Wow.
None. Especially when the primary antidote for that condition is one of the most powerful medications and compounds known to man. And, that doesn't mean parents shouldn't consider the diagnosis and the medication. I am trying very hard to not scare people away. But what they need to do is be a lot more vigilant in how the consideration of whether this child has the disorder or not is handled properly. And a lot of parents don't know. Frankly, a lot of doctors don't even know. And so we're just sort of winging it. And does it really matter that much if, okay, well, we're diagnosing 15% and it's supposed to be 5? Well, guess what? That's an extra 5 million children being told, hey, there's something off in your brain and you need this pill to help fix it. And sometimes that's fine. A kid gets it and all right, fine. But, a psychiatric diagnosis like that sticks with a kid basically forever. Sure. An awful lot of the time. It changes their personal narrative and their self-image for the rest of their lives. And if it's necessary, God bless you. All right? But if we're going to tell a kid, one kid, let alone 3 to 5 million, if we're going to tell a kid there's something off in your brain, we better damn well be right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What did you find in your research that people were doing or could be doing to help mitigate some of these effects? Let's just say you don't want to medicate and you think that your kid is borderline or maybe even misdiagnosed. What are we talking about? Climbing trees, playing sports, eating better? Like, what did you uncover in your research?
Well, first of all, I want to make it very clear. I am not a physician. I am not a doctor. And I don't want anyone to mistake what I'm sharing here and what you're sharing as well, to mistake it for medical advice. Okay, I think what I'm trying to do is merely educate people, parents, other folks, to know what to ask and what to look for when you talk to your doctor. Mm-hmm. And so I can't say that what times medication is appropriate, what times you need to look at the child's sleep patterns, look at their diet, look at exercise. I mean, of course, there are a lot of kids now who get no recess at school. We've taken that away, and there are some kids who really, really need it, and if they don't get it, they're going to go completely berserk, doing their multiplication tables because they need to get the hell outside and run around. Mm-hmm. And we don't give them that outlet as much as we used to. So I think you need to go into it realizing that not all that coughs is bronchitis. Mm-hmm. And not all that is inattentive is ADHD. It will certainly fit the definition, I'll bet you that. But believe it or not, the definition, and it says it in the official definition, but nobody reads it, is that these behaviors cannot be explained by anything else. Okay? It has to be if everything else is, everything reasonable, anything plausible is ruled out. Mm-hmm. And so first, you really are supposed to first look at the sleep patterns and diet and exercise. Okay, I'm not saying that's going to fix everybody, but you might want to try that first before you give them amphetamine, all right?
Mm-hmm.
And give him a psychiatric diagnosis. Of course, when a child's 5, he doesn't know much about it, but I'll tell you, by 8 or 9, these kids aren't stupid. They go on the internet and they know what ADHD is, and they see all the articles about how it affects life patterns, and you're at serious risk for car crashes and being friendless and venereal disease. I mean, these are literally what the studies have been chosen to show. Wink, wink. And I think that we need to just slow down. It's very hard to slow down. Right now, it's September, and 56 million children just went back to school. And a lot of them are going to struggle for the first time, whether it's first grade because, they had been in kindergarten and preschool, and first grade sort of starts being a little bit more structured, and some kids struggle with that. 4th and 5th grade is another time when, you're not in kindergarten, second grade, you're not in first, second grade anymore. You're actually like writing essays and doing real math. Middle school, the first year of middle school, a lot of kids, more kids will be diagnosed with ADHD in the next couple of months than at any other time during the year. And it's difficult to slow down when it feels like, okay, he has ADHD. Everybody has ADHD now. And I think we just need to slow down, maybe take an extra couple of weeks. I know it's hard. No one said it was easy, but I think it's something that we need to start thinking about doing.
But it's the right thing. So when we talk about the education system, there's been a lot of critique out there about just kind of one size fits all, hyper stressful testing environment where you're just running through a machine and you're only as good as your performance on these standardized tests, and this whole it's basically going to crush the outlier kids who are actually creative and think differently and all that. How much of your research pointed to some of the systems being part of the culprit?
I think it's very difficult to pinpoint. You can't control for this. It's a very difficult thing to untangle. All right. I think common sense suggests that as recess and gym have, deteriorated, that some kids are going to have energy that they can't burn off. I think as we see teachers get graded, get evaluated, get paid on how their kids perform on standardized tests, and schools and funding can depend on how well these kids do on standardized tests. There is an incentive. Yeah. Even in very well-meaning people, it could be subconscious, but there's an incentive of like, can we just get this kid to calm the hell down and stop distracting my class, please? Mm-hmm. All right. And, there are pressures all over the place. There are more, more families with 2 people working and less time for the kids, less time for that supervision and extra help. So all of these things, insurance, the doctors will say, as I said, that, I only get paid, for 20 minutes or 40 minutes, so I'm going to just do it and make it quick and be done with it. Yeah. And so there are an awful lot of factors, and none of them can be isolated. And I don't think any of them could be or even should be asked to be fixed in the short term. Nothing is going to change drastically in the short term. But if each gets just a little marginal tweak, if people slow down, if doctors say, you know what, maybe I won't get paid for that second session, but I owe it to the kid to maybe get it right. Parents say, okay, wait a minute, maybe I don't need to take him to the psychiatrist. Maybe there are some other things that could be tried first. Again, when the time comes, if you got to take him to the psychiatrist, God bless you. Okay. But if everybody is just a little bit more aware of some of the forces, a little bit of change in each area can make one hell of a difference.
Sure. Well, when say it's 3 o'clock, you've had a long day, you could choose to have a cup of coffee or not, but you have that cup of coffee, man, you're going to have more energy, right? It's just, it's a little bit more energy, it's a little more edge. So whether or not you have the diagnosis or not, taking one of these drugs does give you a very strong psychoactive effect. And so it's like, wow, see, he's so much better. Question is, did he actually need that amount? Did he actually need that, that shot in the arm or not? And that's, it's subjective as much as it is objective in some ways, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, look, this stuff is also a street drug, right? I mean, kids who don't get this diagnosis are taking it for other reasons, no?
Well, yeah, and what you alluded to is the fact, it's something I flicked out before, which is that these drugs, and they're medications too, but drugs, medications, amphetamine, which is Adderall and Vyvanse, and methylphenidate, which is Concerta and Ritalin. There are a few others, but those are the the Four Musketeers. These things will boost motivation and attention in just about anybody. Now, sometimes the side effects are too strong, and sometimes it doesn't react in somebody, the way that it usually does. But most human beings will feel pretty jazzed and pretty aroused and, ready to hunker down with these medications. Again, it's far more visible and perhaps important in somebody with extraordinarily low levels of attention and a sort of self-control, bodily control. But it helps just about anybody. And that's one of the problems with these doctors, some doctors who say, well, try this, give them this Concerta and see if it helps. That's the equivalent of saying, give him these platform shoes, see if he gets taller. You can't decide that a kid has ADHD just because he improves on the drugs, because that just means he's a human being.
Right.
Not that he had ADHD. But a lot of people say, oh, there it is. It's confirmed. He's better, so he must have had ADHD all this time. And hey, maybe he did. But it's not because he did better on these meds. And so to the extent that it helps just about anybody, or can help just about anybody, you have high school kids and college kids for a very long time. College and high school kids getting their friends who have a diagnosis and prescription to give them pills to help them get through finals or study harder or knock out a term paper overnight. And these kids don't know what they're messing with. They think it's from a doctor. A lot of them think it's from a doctor. It can't be bad for me. And they don't realize it's amphetamine. It's speed. And handled the right way, it could be a great medication for some people. But handled incorrectly, it's one of the most addictive substances known to medicine. It's a notch below the opioids, below OxyContin, and then Valium and benzos, Xanax and whatnot. But it's about number 3, and it's dangerous stuff if you
Seriously.
mess around with it. And so you're right; it becomes. I wouldn't say it's a street drug as much as it is a library drug. You go into any college library, decently good college library, and I guarantee you could get a tab of Adderall within 15 minutes easily.
Wow.
And that we need to talk about this. Is this what we want? Maybe it is.
Well, I mean, you got to also look upstream. I knew a guy who was the founder of a very successful vitamin company, worth hundreds of millions of dollars, owned a ton of New York real estate and all this stuff. And, I'm a young guy. I say, what's the secret to your success? And he said, for about 5-6 years, I just did a lot of speed and just outperformed my competitors and stayed up and just crushed them. And no one could figure out where I got all the energy. And I'm like, well, you borrowed it from your latter life. And he said, yeah, but look at me, I'm rich. And so that is also a mark of our culture, right? So how do you expect these kids to not have edge when everyone's cutting and slicing and doing what it takes to cut those corners to get ahead? I mean, that's obviously a cultural question that also comes up with this.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's you can't paint with as broad a brush as you just did. Now I understand,
Right.
there's a certain amount of time we have, and there's not a lot of time for nuance. But I think that the amount of pressure that kids are under makes some of them think I have to do better than my best. I can't fail, and so they will do what they need to do better. It's not unlike athletes and steroids. And sort of cheating or bending the rules or going against the philosophy of good sportsmanship.
But there's rules against steroid use. The Olympics kick your ass out. The Russians didn't get invited because we know that is unfair, and then it's a race to the bottom. But
Yeah.
if the kid across the street who barely had any of the criteria but got the diagnosis, it has the drug that helps him outperform you, and there's no disincentive to take it, then where's the line?
Well, I think that can happen in some kids. I don't think that is, I don't think we can isolate that as, the main problem.
Sure.
Okay. I think it's more, getting to Harvard or you're a failure.
Sure.
That type of, I think that it's more internal.
Well, yeah, but get into Harvard and there's 200 open spots, and the guy next to you is snorting Adderall, and he, whether he does or not, there's a perception that he has some edge because now that culture is built into the library culture. Yeah. So yeah, it's complicated, but yeah, to your point, well, Harvard only has so many seats.
Well, but I think that what we need to do is hey, look, acknowledge that sometimes these drugs really help people do better. Mm-hmm. Okay, a lot of times they don't, and that's fine. But in the people that it does, they're going to keep doing it because they see it doing better for them. I mean, there are a lot of specious studies out there that say, oh, it doesn't help people on average. These are short-term studies, and fine, they don't help people on average. Some people, are going to do badly, and they're going to stop. Some people are going to do better, mm-hmm. and they're going to keep doing it.
Right.
And so next thing you know, those folks are doing what they're doing. And yes, it creates a sort of arms race to keep up with the Joneses. But I do think that we need to be careful about our characterization of the efficacy of the medications to really help you do a lot better. It's certainly not in a majority of people by any means. And what we need to do is say, look, kids aren't stupid. They're going to try these things. What we need to do is educate them as to what it is that they're trying. Mm-hmm. And they need to know that these things are incredibly addictive. I mean, really, really addictive. Human beings like amphetamine. Mm-hmm. And that ain't going to change anytime soon. Mm-hmm. And they need to know that, what, if your roommate who, does a lot of this stuff starts talking to the drapes, well, he's not being quirky. He's probably hallucinating because he's abusing amphetamine. Mm-hmm. And we just need to arm people with the knowledge of what it is that they're doing. I mean, kids are going to still do stuff. Mm-hmm. At least they know that cocaine's bad for you. At least they know, what it means to be drunk and to not drive and things like that. We've educated people. They know very little. Students know very little about what it is they're messing with here. And I think that if some of them knew, they wouldn't do it. If they knew that it was a federal crime to possess a Class 2 controlled substance that wasn't prescribed to you, it's a federal crime. And, colleges don't really care, frankly. They want kids to do better. And, there are worse problems on college campuses. You have, the drinking and God knows the sexual assault issues that have been coming out over the past couple of years. And this has been a part of colleges for so much longer than anybody really knows. Mm-hmm. The first article written about college kids abusing amphetamine for studying was in Time magazine in 1937.
Wow.
Where kids in the Midwest were taking the drugs to stay up later and study. And then the article was called Pep Pill Poisoning because some kids were getting into some horrible health problems.
What are those? Let's get into the side effects. What goes up must come down. So what's the downside of this physiologically? I mean, obviously addiction, which is huge.
Well, I mean, let's just look at what we know amphetamine does. Mm-hmm. It suppresses your appetite. These were diet pills in the 1960s. Okay, Adderall's ancestor was Obitrol, which is a very popular diet pill. Dexedrine. These were all things. Did you ever watch Family Ties? There was an episode about this in 1983 where Michael J. Fox borrows this girl's diet pills and then, to study and everything. So it suppresses your appetite. And sometimes, very much in a bad way, all right? And then you can sometimes not sleep anything close to a healthy pattern. Those are the more likely things. But more rarely, but sometimes you hallucinate, particularly if you take too much of it. There's this weird reaction where you feel like there are bugs crawling under your skin. And I mean, I'm not sure why that would be a side effect, but it is. And you don't know, and it freaks you out. And there are, heart effects, but mainly addiction, though that's really the biggie, addiction, or perhaps just a loosening of one's aversion to other mind-altering substances. If you get all wired on Adderall and you want to come down because, like, oh man, I'm just going out of my head, next thing you know, you're taking a Valium to come down, or drinking. And sometimes that'll work out fine, but a lot of times it won't. And you'll start going on this, up and down cycle that you then can't stop. And there are a lot of people who enter drug rehab now who go into rehab because of opioids or benzos or drinking or heroin, whose road to rehab either started or had some bricks that belonged to amphetamine. And it plays a role in drug addiction more than just when you get addicted to those drugs. It's a part of a larger picture. Now, does everybody who misuses these drugs get addicted? Of course not. If they did, we'd already know. The problem is that the drugs have found this sort of safe spot. They're not dangerous enough for people to really choose to recognize the risks.
Yep. And that is one of the biggest challenges. I mean, listen, we're hitting everything from extremes. You come up, you got to come down. You come up hard, you got to come down hard, and it just creates this really challenging environment, like all around for us. And so, like, as a parent, I know my kid's going to get exposed to this stuff. I want to give my kid edge. I want my kid to get into Harvard as much as any other parent does. And so, there's all of these other kind of unfair advantages that are out there. And there's other classes. I mean, look, there's people taking the racetam family, there's nootropics, there's all sorts of people especially in my health and wellness space, that are doing all kinds of weird stuff, trying to get some and I tried a nootropic the other day that, looked very safe, and I was cracked out for 2 days.
Wow.
Right?
Wow.
And it didn't have any amphetamines in it. Everyone's trying to play with this stuff. I've always been very guarded about it for obvious reasons. And so it seems to be kind of booted up in the culture in a way where it can't be ignored either. That's the hard part, right? I mean, you gotta compete.
Well, yes, some people will feel that way. A lot of people on Wall Street, a lot of people, lawyers who have to log 2,800 hours, bill 2,800 hours a year in the race to get partner. A lot of tech startups in Silicon Valley and here in New York. I know of some where they literally have a jar of these pills available, and you can just, take one. It's like give a penny, take a penny at the 7-Eleven. And there are people who think that I cannot compete unless I do this, and that's tragic. Yeah. We shouldn't put people in a position where they feel like they have to do this, or they will fail. Yeah. And that was, of course, the argument when it came to steroids in sports. I mean, yes, there are health risks with steroids in sports, particularly for children, but we didn't want a situation where people are compelled to take health risks just because everyone else is. That's not what we want, and it's very clumsy, of course, the steroids and steroid testing. It's a mess. But you see certain sports, of course, most sports now, of course, test for amphetamine. Baseball used amphetamines like crazy because of the exhausting travel schedules. But even like poker tournaments ban Adderall use because these guys have to concentrate for 18 hours. And trust me, Adderall can help them some of them do that. Video game tournaments made it a banned substance. It's amazing. It's entered the culture. I mean, you have Limitless, the movie that came out, which was obviously, dealing with the issues of our wanting to improve our brains through substances. Wouldn't it be great? I'd love to be smarter. Trust me, I could use it.
Who doesn't want edge? So quick. Who doesn't want edge in life, right? Like it just makes sense to be a better you. But the promise of this, the backside of the promise is the fallout and the addiction and all this kind of nasty stuff. Question, just to clarify, if I was a card-carrying ADHD patient of a psychiatrist, and I was in a poker tournament, would that get me a bye? Because now it's a medical condition.
I think generally, yes, because it certainly does in professional sports,
right?
Okay, because it would be against the Americans with Disabilities Act.
Right. You
have a medical condition. Now there are some professions which do not allow anyone medicated for ADHD. I think the FAA. I don't think pilots. Please forgive me if I have that wrong, but I looked into it a couple of years ago, and pilots, I believe, are not allowed to need ADHD medication just because of the nature of their jobs. The military has some complicated rules with respect to the medical use, cleared medical use of ADHD drugs.
Yeah.
It's more a matter of safety. Excuse me. Let me just.
Sure. Yeah, but that kind of takes us back to where we started, which is, hey, look, I'm a poker player, I'm a baseball player. All I got to do is walk into a doctor's office who's going to, not have more than 20 minutes and script this thing, and then I'm back to where I started, which is really kind of shaky guidelines for diagnosis, which then lumps a lot of people into this. So is that, so what in your gestalt, after looking at all this and really kind of piecing this together and then picking it apart, where are the solutions? I'm assuming it's multifaceted, but we looking at diagnosis, overhaul, what are we doing?
Well, I think that I do think it basically starts and just about ends with the doctors, with the prescribers, because everyone wants to talk about Big Pharma, and I get it, and Big Pharma has acted horribly throughout all this, getting parents to think their children have ADHD when they don't, and getting them to want medication for their kids when they do not fit the construct. Pharma has acted abhorrently. But you know what? Pharma doesn't prescribe. It doesn't. It takes a doctor to prescribe, to diagnose and prescribe. And the doctor is supposed to go through the process and make sure that the person does fit the construct appropriately. Are they always going to get it right? Of course they're not going to always get it right. Who's expecting perfection here? We're a long way from perfection. It is so easy to improve this, where if the doctors just slow down. I know some doctors, you just wear a suit, complain that you're having a hard time concentrating at work, and boom, you walk out with a prescription in 10 minutes. And it's not just isolated, it's all over the place. And what are they thinking? I don't know. There was a nurse practitioner at Harvard University Student Health who prescribed Adderall to a kid because he drank a lot of Red Bull. I'm not kidding. It was in the transcript of her deposition, because the kid ended up, well, I'm not going to get into all that. Right? It wasn't a pretty ending. All right.
Yeah.
And so they need, as I said before, slow down. And you know what? Yes, some patients are going to say, and a lot of patients are going to say, look, doc, you don't give it to me. I'm going to get it from somebody else. Well, you know what? Fine. I'm not
going to be that kind of doctor. Yeah.
Yeah. And are you going to lose some patients? Yes. Yes, you are.
Yeah.
But at least you'll be you see, these doctors, and I don't mean to impugn all doctors. I'm not, but they are the gatekeepers. They are the ones who can diagnose and medicate. So they are supposed to be the ones. Remember, they've signed a covenant with the people of their state in return for having a monopoly on the ability to make a diagnosis and write a prescription, okay, which are very valuable things, and people want those things. They have a monopoly on that business, okay, in the amphetamine business, if you will, okay, or the ADHD business. And I don't mean to be crass. That's just basically what it is. All of that business has to go through their doors. And in return for that monopoly, they have signed a covenant with their state to behave responsibly. And a lot of them are breaking that covenant. And it's unconscionable, and they should not do that. It's very, it's all hunky-dory to say they shouldn't do that. I think that evil doctors will behave in bad ways, just like evil... Evil, maybe not evil. I don't want to start getting into politics, but ill-meaning or clueless doctors, they're in every profession, okay? You do see situations with police, politicians, journalists, heaven forbid, okay? There are people out there who are just bad people. Sure. And we ain't going to be able to do anything about that. But if we train doctors, like pediatricians get no training in ADHD, basically none. And yet these parents are coming to them because there's no child psychiatrist within 50 miles. And, doc, can you just take care of this, okay? Can you just help us out because, Jimmy is causing a lot of trouble at school and we're really worried and we're all very frazzled at home. And the doctor will be like, all right. And he or she needs to slow down. And if it annoys the parent, tough luck. That is my personal feeling.
Do the right thing.
Think about this example, okay? What kind of car do you own? What make of car do you own?
Infinity.
Okay, you have an Infinity. And you got some stuff happening with your car. The brakes aren't doing so good. There's a clinking noise in the engine. And you're like, okay, I want to bring it to the Infinity dealer. And you bring it to the Infinity dealer, and you get it back in a couple of days. And, a week later, you have to stop short, and your brakes don't function properly. And you bring it back to the dealer, and you say, "Yo, you said you took care of the brakes. You basically said it was fixed." And he said, "Well," I only spent 20 minutes on your brakes because Infinity Corporate doesn't reimburse me for more than 20 minutes, and so
tough shit.
I just sort of stopped there." And I mean, you wouldn't accept that. I mean, that's preposterous, right? Well, guess what? If it's not good enough for your car, it's not good enough for your child. And you shouldn't allow anybody to put a label as significant as ADHD. I'm not saying it's a scarlet letter. I'm not saying it's a death sentence, but it's a serious thing. A psychiatric diagnosis is a serious thing. And you shouldn't allow that to happen with your child unless you've really gone through the proper procedures. I just bumped the computer. Sorry. I get animated about
No problem. Well, you should be animated about it. This is serious stuff. And look, I don't know if there's a cure for evil when it comes to doctors, but there's certainly a cure for lazy. And so, there's this middle ground of doctors who just, are overwhelmed and tired and, are kind of, they've given up on trying to fix the system and they're just trying to make ends meet. And those doctors are the ones, that's a majority. It's like the managed care is shrinking, the money's shrinking. It's really hard. It's really, because I'm going to advocate for the doctors a little bit here because, look, I come from that world.
That's what I'm trying to do is make sure we don't throw all doctors under the bus.
Yeah. Because
a lot of them are well-meaning. It's just the circumstances they found themselves in. They don't have the training. And they just like, all right, let's give this a try because it might help the kid. Hey, they're trying. A lot of them. So yes,
but it's a shitty system and it's a downward spiral. I can say that. It's my show. You can say it. Yeah, right. you can say it too. You can say whatever you want. Okay. So alienating and criminalizing and all that. I mean, sure, if someone's doing criminal behavior, let's go get them. But talking about this as a society and saying, look, let's slow down. If you could lean into Blue Cross and say, why the hell aren't you paying them for sessions 2 through 5? There's a lot of of policy changes and things that could be kind of, invoked here to fix this, but, looking at it in a holistic way, I think is what you've done here. And it's big. I mean, this is a big book, right? There's a lot of information in here, and there's a lot of research you've done.
Show the cover. You gotta
yeah,
show the cover.
So here's one. I'm going to put it up here. And the book is called ADHD Nation by Alan Schwarz. Available now, and it is an important subject. If you are around kids, if you've got kids, if you have grandkids, you got to know that this is a serious, I don't know if the word epidemic is even lightly used. I mean, it is the making of an American epidemic, as you say, and it's not just around the corner, it's kind of here.
Yeah, I mean, look, we have 11% of kids already diagnosed with ADHD. And the American Psychiatric Association, in the official definition of ADHD that's used in all over the place, including insurance, okay? That's how you get, a diagnosis and get reimbursed for insurance. The official definition of ADHD says that it affects about 5% of children. Mm-hmm. Well, guess what? We're diagnosing 11%. And 15% of children will get a diagnosis by the time they turn 18. But so let's look at that 11%. Let's just say that all 5% of, even 7 or 8%, people could generally live with that. Let's just say 8% of kids really do have ADHD. And unfortunately, we don't have a blood test. We don't have an X-ray we're always going to make mistakes. There's no question about it. There are always going to be a gazillion kids who are misdiagnosed. But let's just say we bring that 11% down to 10. All right? Still way too high. Right. But we bring that 11% down to 10. Well, guess what? That 1%, that is 600,000 children who won't be told there's something wrong with your brain. Mm. And they might have other problems. Like I said, they might have anxiety. There might be terrible family trauma at home. Things that require intervention. Their problems are real. Mm-hmm. They're not made up. It's just they're not ADHD, and they're not going to be solved by Adderall. They're going to be solved by other things, or at least ameliorated by other things. Yep. So we just need to pinpoint our efforts in ways that we just have ignored for so long here. And it's only going to get worse before it gets better. It's not like everyone's going to go, oh, hey, Schwarz says that we need to do better. This genie's out of the bottle, baby. Mm-hmm. And the CDC is going to be coming out with its next report. And that 11% is going to get up to 12. I can tell you right now, I haven't heard. But it went up from 9.5 to 11 last time. Mm. And while the growth is slowing, it has to. My guess is it'll be 12. Or 11.8 or 12. It's just going up.
It's a lot of kids.
And it's a lot of kids, and some of them really need the diagnosis and the medication, and God bless them. But a lot of them don't. And it's time that we think about diagnosing the right kids instead of every kid who looks like he might benefit.
Amen. Amen. Alan, thank you so much. We're out of time. I love your energy. I love your enthusiasm about this. It's important. And so I want to thank you for being on the show. And, again, if you have a kid in your life that's even close to this strike zone, you need to know more about this. If you know someone who has a kid and, whether they have a diagnosis or, they're having behavioral trouble, you need to take a look at this. These labels end up basically branding people for life. It becomes a very big deal. It's an important subject. I'd love to hear what you have to think about this in our chat threads, wherever you're seeing this, listening to this, and keep in touch. Let me know how this is touching you and how this is impacting what you're going to do in your life. Thank you so much for being here. I will see you next time. Dr. Pedram Shojai, the Urban Monk.